Welcome to The Explainer. If you've been feeling that grinding exhaustion of modern hustle culture, that creeping burnout that honestly makes you question why you're working so hard in the first place, well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're diving into a fascinating framework known as the Sovereign Protocol. Think of this as a tactical guide to completely dismantling that burnout. It offers a wildly different lens on how we pursue mastery, and the insights we're going to unpack today are, quite frankly, absolute game changers.
Okay, let's dive into this. Success is not a static destination you arrive at. It is a brutal, highly selective psychological filtration system. Let that sink in for a second. This completely shifts how we view burnout, right? It's not some sign of personal weakness. It is literally a feature of a system that constantly tests our psychological endurance by dangling these endless finish lines in front of us. Think about it. How often do we tell ourselves, "Oh, I'll finally relax once I get that promotion," or "Once I hit this revenue goal, I'm totally good." But the finish line just keeps moving.
So to actually survive that filtration system, the text introduces our first archetype, the process-driven sovereign. I absolutely love this term. A sovereign is someone whose motivation is completely, 100% self-sustaining. They aren't looking around for applause or pats on the back. Their entire focus is locked onto the journey of becoming and the raw, gritty execution of the work itself. Picture a coder who just loses track of time because they are completely obsessed with solving a puzzle, or a writer totally absorbed in the rhythm of drafting a chapter. By drawing their energy directly from the process, they become essentially unkillable in their pursuits. They stay grounded, they stay resilient, and it totally doesn't matter if there's some shiny reward waiting for them at the end of the day. Now, on the exact flip side of that, we have the outcome-driven mercenary, which, let's be totally honest here, is exactly how the modern world trains us to operate. We become completely dependent on external reinforcement. A mercenary is motivated solely by the end result. If they aren't getting the fame, the money, or those instant hits of pleasure, they just start to fall apart. This is a fragile, systemic failure of an approach, and look, we've all been there for sure. When we operate this way, we're literally putting our emotional stability into the hands of a totally unpredictable, chaotic world.
All right, let's look at the science behind this in Section 1, Neurobiology of the Loop.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what's happening under the hood. When we look at the brain's internal reward architecture, we see two completely different dopamine formulas at play. The outcome-driven path relies on taking an action and then waiting for that anticipated reward. Interestingly, neurobiology shows us that dopamine is heavily tied to that anticipation. But if that anticipation drags on without a payoff, the system gets incredibly stressed. The process-driven path, on the bottom, collapses the equation entirely. The action is the reward. This perfectly explains exactly how you feel on a random Tuesday afternoon staring at your screen. Are you working for some future hit, or are you getting it right now, in the moment? Let's zoom in on that top formula for a second, what we call the outcome-driven trap. When you only care about the outcome, you end up treating the actual work like a painful, necessary tax. Your brain is essentially holding off on releasing that hit of dopamine until you secure the prize. But what happens if the runway is super long? What if the market shifts or the reward gets delayed? The whole formula breaks. You experience a total system crash. Cognitive fatigue sets in, your discipline just evaporates, and your brain goes on this desperate hunt for immediate substitutes to plug that chemical deficit. Suddenly, you find yourself doom scrolling for 45 minutes or aggressively eating a sleeve of cookies just to feel something. But then, look at the incredible contrast of the process-driven edge. When you're genuinely motivated by the journey of becoming, this profound neurological shift occurs. The sheer act of solving a complex data puzzle, moving heavy iron in the gym, or refining an operational workflow releases a steady, sustainable drip of dopamine. Because the fuel source is totally self-contained right there in the effort itself, you create a continuous loop. You grant yourself an infinite operational runway. You literally don't need the external environment to validate you to keep going. You generate your own momentum. Which brings us to Section 2, the reward obsession trap. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it describes the trap almost every single one of us has fallen into at some point. This definitely isn't about pointing fingers, it's just diagnosing a very common human vulnerability. When we obsess over the reward, our methods inherently become corrupted. We start chasing instant fame and, frankly, building lies. We might seek control and power just as a blunt instrument to mask our own deep insecurities. And instead of creating actual value, we become passive consumers of status markers, completely tethered to this shifting, volatile, external scorecard that we can't even control. I mean, you see this absolutely everywhere today. The framework suggests that obsessing over outcomes inherently creates structural fragility.
It leads to building a performative personal brand, essentially a hollow facade constructed just for the applause. But leaning into the process, that is exactly what builds unkillable domain expertise, where you become an active value creator. Deep, asymmetric value is created in the trenches, and absolutely no algorithm change or market crash can ever take that away from you.
Let's get into the solution in Section 3, the Sovereignty Protocol.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a highly actionable toolkit. The protocol outlines 3 definitive steps to completely hardwire the process and permanently abandon that fragile mercenary framework. We've got executing a metric inversion, falling in love with the boring friction, and finally, the zero difference identity check. Let's break these down one by one because this is the exact moment where we really start to take back control of our focus.
So step 1 is the metric inversion. Instead of tracking those macro outcomes like follower counts, bank balances, or body fat percentages, the protocol suggests completely replacing them with strict input metrics. Metrics that you have 100% control over. Did you log 4 hours of uninterrupted deep cognitive focus today? Did you execute your physical conditioning and recovery protocols? Did you read raw scientific data vectors for 45 minutes? Success becomes entirely about the purity of your adherence to these inputs, completely ignoring the immediate reaction of the outside world. It is incredibly freeing when you realize the only scorecard that actually matters is the one you control.
Then we get to step 2, and this is where the major mental shift really happens. You literally have to fall in love with the boring friction. Elite high performers consciously recognize that the true magic lives inside the unglamorous, repetitive work. When you sit down and feel that intense urge to just quit, the framework suggests using this really empowering reframe. This exact moment of deep focus, resistance, and cognitive strain is where my hardware is being upgraded. The execution is the win. It completely turns the obstacle into the reward. The friction isn't stopping you from doing the work, and actually scratch that. The friction is the work. Section 4, the ultimate test. So the crucial point is, we have to ask ourselves if we've successfully decoupled our fulfillment from a chaotic world.
All of this builds to one final, defining question, the ultimate zero difference check. Think about this carefully. If a cosmic law declared that no matter how hard you worked over the next 10 years, you would never, ever receive public acclaim, status, or external applause, would you still choose to execute this craft? Would you still build this enterprise? If your answer is a definitive, visceral yes because you simply love the challenge of mastering the game, then you have achieved true intrinsic sovereignty. And that is how you become unkillable.